Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. As you all know, I've been doing the Scooby-Doo Readathon, which is being hosted by Simone at Me, Simone and I, and is being co-hosted by Clint from Reads Readers and Emily from Novel Novels. So, a little behind on videos, so I'm going to do sort of a 2-for-1-er here. So the last one that I just recently read, or I should say the two that I just most recently read, the first one being The Evil Queen by Gina Sholter, and that was for the Daphne prompt number 4, and that was to basically buy a book based on the cover and nothing but the cover. So that was the book that I had chosen for that one, and so I will keep these reviews as spoiler-free and simple as possible for those of you who haven't read them yet, and then I will do more of a deep dive on these later. So for The Evil Queen, I have to say I enjoyed this book so much. I was a little skeptical at first going into it just because I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. And then it really got into the story, and honestly, I fell so in love with it. It follows the main character, and it goes into basically a retelling of Snow White and different perspectives and how the story could have gone. And for any of you who may have watched the most recent, well, I guess it's not that recent anymore, but a TV show called Once Upon a Time, I would definitely compare this book to the concept of that TV show, where again it was multiple different fairy tales primarily based around Snow White, and it gave different perspectives to each of the characters and how they could have been. And I really enjoyed this book because actually I thought it was better than the TV show in comparison. And just that by the time you went to the end of the book, it revealed that more than one character could play more than one role. So, the main girl that we follow, Everly, she, they're all going based on prophecy, which is the story of Snow White. And there are multiple different versions of it with various different ways that it goes. Ultimately, always ending with this evil queen, being killed off, right? So, but by the time you get to the end of the story, you'll learn that, Everly not only has potentially played the role of the evil queen, she's played multiple different roles. The way the events and the story and the way that choices are made, she could have easily fallen underneath the Snow White category. She could have fallen underneath the henchman category or the huntsman category. Hell, she could have even fallen underneath the Prince Charming category. And as the story unfolds, you learn that or that same ideology gets placed with other characters that, in a similar concept to what A.G. MacDonald likes to talk about or has talked about in the past, that the characters aren't black and white. There's a ton of gray, and it's all based on choices and the situations in which you're placed in. So, the heroes can be seen as the villains, and the villains can be seen as the heroes. It all really comes down to perspective and what the situation is and what you get forced into doing and the choices you make based on those situations. And, I really enjoyed the story. There was, bits of romance. I mean, it was very subtle, but there was bits of romance. There was lots of relationships that were created. There was lots of intrigue, definitely some adventure. No, I absolutely loved the story, and I'm skimming over it just because it's hard not to talk about it without giving away spoilers, because I would love nothing more than just to dive into this whole thing bit by bit and just give it all away, but I'm trying really hard to refrain from doing that. So that's kind of that. And apparently this is book 1 of a series, so I'm not sure when the next one's coming out, but I am really, really looking forward to seeing what happens in the second one. Although, yes, this book could definitely be good as a standalone, there are indications of future events, and I would really, really like to know more about what goes on after this, especially since there are characters that don't get put into too much depth or too much description, and I'd love to know more about them. So I'm hoping that if and when the second book comes out, there's more detail and more story in and around the other characters. I also love the fact that this book hinted at the fact that the realm that they're in, each different part of the realm is undergoing their own fairy tale and their own, what's the word, prophecy, so to speak. And they mentioned several. They mentioned The Little Mermaid, they mentioned Cinderella, they mentioned Beauty and the Beast, they mentioned, Rumpelstiltskin. They mentioned quite a few, and actually the one that surprised me the most was the fact that they mentioned the Swan Princess. And I'll be completely honest, that one like never gets referenced. So I'd be very curious to see if this author will eventually dive into the prophecies of the other parts of the enchanted world that they're in. That would be really, really cool. Anyways, enough rambling on about that one. So again, that was The Evil Queen by Gina Schulter, and I read that for the fourth prompt, which was Daphne. And then I quickly, as I finished that Saturday, I quickly decided to dive into my next book, and I ended up changing the book that I was going to read just because for once I was really in a fantasy mood and wasn't really feeling Nora Roberts at that particular moment. So instead of reading Nora Roberts' Night Move, which is what I was going to read for the Scrappy Do prompt, which is to read a book less than 200 pages, I opted to read The Last Unicorn instead. I've read the book. I have now. I have seen the movie umpteen million times. I own it. It is one that I enjoy very much. And I decided that after I learned about the fact that it was a book, of course it's a book, I decided to give that one a go, and that one as well was a really short one, so I finished that late last night. This now being Sunday morning, or rather Monday morning, I finished this book late last night, so it definitely falls under the Scrappy Doo category of it being a short book. And I have to say, I actually think I prefer the movie to the book. And that's only because while the book does go into a little bit more detail and adds information about certain parts of the story, honestly, I don't think it really mattered, and it probably could have done without it. There was definitely parts that was further drawn out than it needed to be. So overall, I think I prefer the movie to the book this time. For those of you who don't know, The Last Unicorn is based on complete fantasy. Basically, there's a unicorn, and she is content in her world, and she's good, and then she comes across the idea that she might be the last unicorn in the world, and it makes her stop and pause and realize that she hasn't seen another one in quite some time and doesn't understand the concept of this. So she learns details about where they may be, and she decides to set out on a journey of her own to see about figuring out and finding the rest of her kind and her people. And she discovers that they're trapped and being held captive by some evil king, and that she has to brave multiple different challenges in order to free them. And in the end, I won't spoil it, but in the end, she goes through a lot. And one of the biggest things that they talk about in this book is the fact that a unicorn, being an immortal creature, doesn't regret and doesn't know how emotions of a human being work. And inadvertently, she ends up learning what that's about. And so she ends up being a unicorn that is very unique. She is an immortal creature and now knows what emotions are like in that sense, and the feeling of regret. And again, I really enjoy the friendships and bonds that get built in this story. And although, like I said, I think the book dove too much into detail, and when certain parts were definitely drawn out a little too much, I definitely prefer the movie just because they took each important piece and they threw it together and made a movie out of it, including the music. And I really enjoy the music, actually. The soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal. Definitely heart-wrenching. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. And again, I can always do a deeper dive into that book for anyone who might be interested, and I may just do that in the future. So those are the two books that I have recently just finished reading. Evil Queen by Gina Scholter and The Last Unicorn. So those are for the Scrappy Doo prompt and for the Daphne prompt. And the next one that I'm going to be reading will be for the Velma prompt, which is, I believe, prompt 3. And originally I was going to read Born, the first book in the series, and I just decided that, honestly, I'm not feeling it at the moment. I'm really into a fantasy mode at the moment, so I'm switching gears. Velma is, the prompt is to read a book where the protagonist is a genius of sorts. So although I've read this book before, it's been quite some time and I'm going to reread it. So the book that I'm going to be reading is called The Alchemist by Michael Scott, and it is a fantasy mythological story where the main person, or the main protagonist, if you will, I would absolutely consider a genius, as the story is based around the events and life of Nicholas Flamel. So for those of you unsure of who that is and know Harry Potter, he was mentioned in the first one as the creator of the Philosopher's Stone. So that will be my next book that I will be indulging into. And at this point, I only have a few prompts left. I have Velma to finish. I have Shaggy to finish, which for that one, I'll be reading Woman 99, a book selected and preferred by Nikki from I Read Past My Bedtime. And then there's the group book read, which is Meddling Kids. And although I think that one will be the last one that I read, I'm a little nervous about reading it just because I haven't heard a ton of good things about it so far. But that's kind of where I am at right now. So thank you again so much for listening. For those of you who are new to my channel, I greatly appreciate you checking this out. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And for those of you who are reoccurring or consistent followers, I thank you so much for reading and for watching and for listening. And I will talk to you in the next video.